"Mom, don't you realise you're embarrassing me?" yelled Floyd, tossing his headphones right back onto the keyboard. "Leave my room!" Nancy was dumbfounded by her son's behaviour. She was going to say something to shame the impudent teenager, but she was confused and unable to find the right words. She left the room. The woman could not understand why Floyd was reacting so harshly. She just wanted to put the cleaned and ironed laundry in her son's room. She knocked on the door, but he obviously did not hear. Then she went into the room and unwittingly got caught on the webcam while Floyd was talking to his friends. And now, standing in the corridor, biting her lip with resentment, Nancy thought that she did not deserve such treatment. After all, she was doing everything for her son, trying to maintain their former life as much as possible, but Floyd was still displeased. Nancy understood that her soft character made it difficult to bring up her son properly. Her husband, Edward, always brought up Floyd properly, skillfully, balancing between strictness and warm friendship, treating the boy as a grown man. And so, Floyd grew up brave, intelligent, fair, ready to stand up for his family and friends, and would never have shouted at his mother before. And certainly, he had never been such an angry, hot-tempered, and resentful, difficult teenager. Nancy, already tired from hard work and household chores, was very upset about her quarrel with her son. Nancy, already tired from hard work and household chores, was very upset about her quarrel with her son. She went into the bedroom, sat on the bed with a sigh, and looked at the picture in a wooden frame standing on the night table. There were she, her husband Edward, and little Floyd in the picture. They were happy at the time, and they seemed to have a happy future ahead of them. "How can I manage without you, Edward?" she said sadly, looking at the picture. Nancy's husband died a year ago in a terrible car accident. He exceeded the speed limit when he was returning from a business trip, and the car crashed into a pole at full speed and caught fire. The car and its passenger burnt to the ground. So they buried Edward, or rather, all that was left of him, in a closed coffin. Since then, life in their house changed greatly. The son became withdrawn, irritable, barely spoke to his mother, and spent all his time in his room with his headphones on his computer. No matter how many times Nancy tried to talk to him, he only brushed her off irritably. And so it was today. Nancy realized that she urgently needed someone to talk to, and decided to call her best friend, Bella, to share her thoughts. Bella had recently bought a summer house in the countryside, and now spent all her spare time there, so they rarely saw each other and communicated mostly over the phone. "Bella, maybe I'm a bad mother," sighed Nancy, telling Bella of her worries. "How many times have I tried to talk to him, but he keeps getting more and more distant from me." "Really? You're nice and kind, Mother, but possibly too kind. Sometimes we have to be tougher on the kids." "I can't do that," explained Nancy. "He's a good boy. It's just the way life has turned out. I believe that only through dialogue we can solve the problem. But how can I talk to him if he's always on the internet?" And then Bella had a wonderful idea. She suggested that Nancy and Floyd came to her country house for the weekend. She had no internet there, but the clean air, swimming on the river, and kebab were guaranteed. Nancy loved the idea. She thought it was true that in a relaxed atmosphere, out in the fresh air and away from the bustle of the city, she would be able to have a heart-to-heart talk with Floyd, especially since it was getting harder and harder to live in the apartment where she and her husband had been happy not so long ago. Nancy could not get over the loss, and even her husband's things in the room were left lying in the same places as the day of his leaving them, as if he were about to return. Nancy promised to talk to Floyd about the trip. In the evening, the boy finally came out of his room and showed up in the kitchen, trying not to meet his mother's gaze. Do you need any help?" he asked. Nancy smiled as she continued to stir fried potatoes and meat in the pan, realizing that this was her son's way of making excuses. "Yeah, help me eat it all," joked the mother. "Oh, that would be my pleasure," smiled Floyd. "It smells so good." Nancy turned to her son and asked him with a smile to take out plates and forks. They had a quiet dinner, and when it was time for dessert, Nancy decided to discuss with Floyd their plans for the next week. The son immediately rebelled. "And what am I going to do there, Mum? To herd cows?" muttered Floyd. "We'll swim or fish. We'll make barbecue," Nancy persuaded her son. "Please, Floyd, let's go together." At that moment, something seemed to break inside the boy from his mother's tone, and he, frozen for a moment, looked up at the woman with green like his father's eyes. Nancy saw her former Floyd again. "Okay, let's go." He nodded finally. The weather was dry and sunny. Bella welcomed her guests with open arms and happily led them along to show her possessions. They were having a great time, and Nancy, enjoying the moment, felt that she could finally take her mind off her worries and cares left behind in the city. After lunch, the son asked to go for a walk around the village, and Nancy and Bella settled in the shade of the gazebo and, drinking cool wine and eating strawberries, finally got a long-awaited opportunity to discuss all the news and gossip that had accumulated for a long time. But not half an hour later, Floyd ran in and rushed to his mother. "Mama!" cried the boy, frightened, and looked at his mother with wide-open eyes. Nancy immediately jumped to her feet and rushed to her son. She tried to find out what happened, but he could not connect the words in a sentence from the shock. Finally, he came to his senses a little, and taking a deep breath, said, "I saw Daddy." "What?" asked Nancy and Bella in unison. "Daddy," repeated the boy, still trembling. "I saw him on the next street, in the house with the red roof. Mama, he's alive! I saw him!" Nancy's heart ached with love and pity for her son. She hugged him tightly and, stroking his head, told him that he had mistook wishful thinking for reality. "No," resented Floyd, freeing himself from his mother's arms. "Mum, I swear it's Dad." Bella suggested that Nancy go and check by herself to dispel all doubts and reassure her son. Nancy, of course, did not believe that she would see her spouse, but seeing her son's condition, she agreed. Leaving Floyd with Bella, she approached the house with the red roof and timidly looked inside the yard. There was a man standing there chopping wood. When he turned around and looked at Nancy, she froze in place. It was Edward. The man stared at her for a moment, then went back to work as if nothing had happened. Nancy was shocked and did not dare to call out to the man. Frightened, she returned and began to ask Bella about the tenants of that house, but her friend had only recently settled in the area and knew almost no one, except a couple of neighbours whose houses were next door. After thinking about it, they decided to go to the neighbour with whom Bella was acquainted and find out if she knew anything about the man from the neighbouring street. The elderly woman welcomed the guests eagerly and, listening to their question, nodded. "You mean Paul, who's staying with Mrs. Griffin?" "Of course, everyone knows about him here. He was found in the woods." "What do you mean, in the woods?" interrogated her pale Nancy. "The local guys found him, unconscious, with his head bashed in and no papers. A local healer fixed him up, and since the man didn't remember anything, and no one was looking for him, Mrs. Griffin took him in. She named him Paul because he looked a lot like her dead son." Nancy jumped up and, in a voice trembling with tension, declared that they had to go back there. Together they went to Mrs. Griffin's house. A man who looked exactly like Edward, only with a beard, looked at them perplexedly. Emotions overwhelmed the boy, and he rushed to the man. "Daddy! Daddy!" Nancy wanted to stop Floyd, but didn't have time. He was hugging the man, and tears were rolling hail from the boy's eyes. The man was stunned, and then he stroked his stiff blonde hair with his broad palm. Suddenly the unbelievable happened. The man trembled, his eyes widened, and his face lit up with understanding. "Floyd," he whispered in a trembling voice. "My son, my dear." He held Floyd tightly to him, and Nancy, still not believing her eyes, covered her mouth with her hands to stifle the bursting sobs. Edward looked at his wife, unable to hold back any more tears. "Nancy, beloved," he murmured. The woman rushed to her dearest people, embracing both of them and showering them with kisses, and thought that she would never let them go from her again. Later on, when they were sitting at Mrs. Griffin's house, who had prepared tea, Edward told what had happened to him that night on the road. He was returning home from a business trip at the night. He was sleepy and decided to have a companion so he could stay awake while he was driving to avoid falling asleep. Just then, he saw a decent-looking man hitchhiking on the road, and Edward decided to give him a ride. But the conversation did not happen. As soon as they started driving, the passenger pulled out a weapon and told the driver to get out of the car. When Edward got out, he hit him on the head with something heavy, probably dragged him away deep into the woods, and drove away. When Edward woke up, he did not remember his name, where he was from, or where he was. He walked into a forest path for a long time until he reached the village, where he lost consciousness. There he was found by the locals, who provided first aid and shelter. "So that's who we buried, instead of you," guessed Nancy. All this time, she was holding her husband's hand, and Floyd was cradling his father on the other side. The woman was afraid to move and unclench her fingers, afraid that it would all turn out to be a dream and Edward would disappear again. But it wasn't a dream. "How nice that I decided to buy a house in the country," said Bella thoughtfully. "You see, even Edward came back to life because of the fresh air," she added cheerfully, and everyone laughed in unison.